And we're recording. I want to welcome Rev Judith Elia. She is an ordained minister of Unity minister serving diverse congregations for over 30 years. She's also a Florida licensed marriage and family therapist. From a young age, her fascination with the soul of psychology led her to train extensively with psychosocial historian and psychoanalyst Eric H. Erickson and family systems pioneer Village Satir. She has organized conferences and events internationally for the United Nations, World Religions, Unity, and Holistic Medicine. She is the minister of the Unity of Santa Maria, where she lives with her wild and wonderful golden lab, Lola, who rescued her 7 years ago. It is her great blessing to share her uncensored views about everything that matters with the wonderful UU congregation in Melbourne, and we appreciate that as well. We love having you. I'm going to go ahead and take down my screen. Thank you for speaking with us today.
I'm so happy to speak to you today. And your congregation inspires me so much, that I often really work hard on what I want to say to you because I'm working hard on what I believe, what I think, what works and what matters for me right now without thinking about anything else, which is difficult, without thinking about what somebody else thinks or how the community is going to react or, what all of that. When I prepare for you, I really feel that I'm preparing for me. And that's the greatest feeling. One of the things that I've been contemplating lately, of course, has been the Dharma in difficult times. And many of you know that the word Dharma is oftentimes interpreted as, right action. But in the deeper sense of the word Dharma, it's really, what do I do? What do I think? What do I give my life to? What is it that is my mission and my vision for this lifetime? So I have a question for you that comes out of something that Stephen Cope said in his book, The Dharma in Difficult Times. What did Gandhi, Emerson, Thoreau, and I would also throw in there Thai, which is what Thich Nhat Hanh like to be called, and Mataji, Bhante, my teachers, what did they all have in common? What did they all do during difficult times? Any suggestions?
Go ahead, Lee.
Cindy, you have to unmute.
You're unmuted now.
Could it be prayer?
Yeah, that definitely is true. What they all had in common is that what they all did when confused and disturbed, they went on retreat.
I think Lee had one as well.
Go ahead, Lee.
Meditate.
Yes. Contemplate, whatever form of spiritual practice. What they did literally was go on retreat. For oftentimes a long period of time if something really disturbed them. I mean, that was what Walden Pond was. Thoreau's, own quest, to figure out what really mattered to him. And Gandhi, when he came back from South Africa after his, Gandhi's train experience, getting thrown off the train and realizing he was black or brown or something that wasn't desirable for the first time, and then helping the Indian people in South Africa, he came back and the Indian people and, Pandit Nehru and people that were influential in India all wanted a strategy for Indian independence. And he went into silence and fasting for what they felt was an inordinate amount of time. People were hassling him, people were upset with him. And then one night, he had a revelation. And when he told people what his strategy was, which was the Salt March. You know, he didn't come up with that on his own or through a committee. It came straight out of meditation, almost like an audible voice to him. And people thought it was a stupid idea. They weren't in alignment with it, you know? And for those of you that don't know, you know, he amassed millions of people to walk far, you know, in India, you know, by the ocean, and then radically take the salt back, which they were not allowed to do because it was owned by the British, right? And that act transformed the entire country and freed India from colonial rule. So, you know, Thoreau went to jail one time during his seclusion in Walden Pond for not paying his taxes. And he was so disturbed himself by his experience that for years he contemplated whether he had made the right decision. And his famous thesis, which we have renamed Civil Disobedience, is the culmination of his soul's discomfort in his question about what's my Dharma in difficult times. And his answer blessed Gandhi. You know, it blessed Emerson. It blessed all of us. It blessed King. You know, it has blessed so many people and future generations of people all over the world. And here I have another question for you. Raise your hand if the answer is yes. Did you know that Ralph Waldo Emerson lived in Florida? Yes, one of you did. Okay, that was a powerful place for Emerson to retreat. So in 1826, faced with his own poor health, Emerson went to seek warmer climate. He first went to Charleston, South Carolina, but found the weather was still too cold. He then traveled further south until he landed in his beloved little haven of health, St. Augustine, Florida, where he took long walks on the beach and began writing poetry. One of the things he wrote in his journal was, "Live in the sunshine, swim the sea, drink the wild air." We can only imagine how beautiful it must have been in St. Augustine in 1826. But as you can imagine, and as we've talked about before, there was racial tension in St. Augustine. At that time, it wasn't as great as other southern states, but St. Augustine was a center of slave trade. And while in St. Augustine, Emerson had his actual first encounter with slavery. At one point, he attended a meeting of a Bible society while a slave auction was taking place in the yard outside the church. He wrote, "One ear heard the glad tidings of great joy, whilst the other was regaled with, 'Going, gentlemen, going,' in the sale of a human being." Much of his early life, Emerson was silent on the topic of race and slavery. Not until he was in his 30s did he begin to publish writings against racial discrimination and slavery. And not until he was in his late 40s and 50s did he become known as a passionate anti-slavery activist. Emerson was a passionate opponent of slavery after he saw it face to face. And his thoughts on the subject are scattered throughout his essays and speeches and collected works. One of the most famous sayings is, if you put a chain around the neck of a slave, the other end fastens itself around your own. Emerson had visited slaveholding territories when he was traveling in the South and encountered firsthand the shocking, inhumane treatment of countless human beings. But he considers St. Augustine, just like Andrew Young and Martin Luther King after him, as a pivotal place for him awakening to the wrongdoings and for him becoming passionate, outspoken, and actively demonstrating against his belief, against these beliefs, and in harmony with his belief about the slave trade. And some of the things that happened for him was that, because of his belief system before encountering slavery face to face, he considered speaking on public questions, in his words, odious, hurtful, and meddling. However, he later realized that it was an injustice to himself and humanity for him not to speak out against the slave trade loudly, passionately, and clearly. How many of you know that he was a pastor for a very short time in 1832? Just raise your hand if you know that. Yeah, it was very short-lived. He came from a family of pastors, and he became the head pastor of the Second Church in Boston. He opened his pulpit to anti-slavery speakers. And shortly later that year, he left his pulpit. In 1844, many years later, he delivered perhaps his most rousing speech in Concord on the abolition of slavery in the British West Indies. And from the beginning of the anti-slavery struggle, although he stood strongly for freedom, he did not take action until later in his life. And these are the reasons that he gave, that he didn't formally join the abolitionists, because although he honored them, their courage and the principles of their leadership, he disliked their methods. He found their perspectives narrow and bitter. And in his heart of hearts, he wanted only to spread kindness, love, and joy, and to lift men higher than they already were. And like Gandhi after him, who said, be the action you want to see in the world, and other people like Merchant Sam Lewis said, I want to go to a peace march where the people are peaceful. He believed the method and the embodiment of the ideal was an important and essential part of the struggle. But it does appear that he was one angry abolitionist. And that sometimes maybe the moment calls us, even if we don't embody the best of our nature, there is something about righteous anger that he embodied. In 1850 especially, when Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act, he became uncompromising. This law, which he called a national tragedy, in his view, it mandated the return of, quote, runaway slaves from any part of the country and made it illegal to assist them. He called it heinous. This filthy act, he wrote, was made in the 19th century by people who could read and write, I will not obey it. By God, I will never obey it. And this is a case of conscience, a call for compassion, a call for mercy. He said, slavery poisons and depraves everything it touches. Union, he said, is a delectable thing. And so is wealth, and so is life. But they may all cost too much if they cost you your honor. Emerson spoke loudly and irritated many people, which he previously said wasn't helpful. But he obviously changed his mind. He published essays and poems that were widely read. He gave lots of money to abolitionists, and he supported them, entertained them in his home. And to those who refused to do battle on this subject, he responded, don't say anything, because what you stand for speaks all the while and thunders so loudly, I couldn't hear what you're saying anyway. And if it shall turn out, as desponding men say, that our people do not really care about whether Boston is a slave port or not, provided our trade thrives. So I want you to hear this in the context of today. We could even translate it into today, because it's so much what I come in contact with a lot, really, is especially when I was in Key West. Oh, yeah, I voted for Trump. I know that, a lot of what he says is not true, but my portfolio is doing well. So let me go back to Emerson. If it turns out, as desponding men say, that our people do not really care about whether Boston is a slave port or not, provided our trade thrives, then we may at least cease to dread hard times and ruin. It is high time our bad wealth came to an end. I'm sure I shall very cheerfully take my share of suffering in the ruin of such a prosperity, and shall be very willing to turn to the mountains, to chop wood, and to seek to find for myself and my children labors compatible with freedom and honor. I can't agree with him more. For what I've just said, my experiences in Key West with people who were so generous in times of need. Oh my gosh, we had a meeting after a hurricane in the Bahamas, and we raised $50,000 in 50 minutes. And people were offering their planes and their boats, to bring things to the Bahamas. In fact, there was one guy, I'll never forget it. He had warehouses full of things for him and his family in case they needed it. And we just emptied them out and sent them over to the Bahamas. But it was so curious, because these same people who were generous in times of need didn't seem to care about immigration. The almost apartheid living situation of Key West, where, people were buying off what had been generations of Black people's simple conch homes and turning them into their multi-million-dollar mansions on a thumbprint of property. And then some of the island called Bahama Village, which was abject poverty. They didn't seem to care about kids in cages right down the street in Homestead, or the changes in voting rights, since their portfolios are doing quite well. At this moment in time, I don't know how you feel, but my soul is not at rest when my country drone bombs and kills innocent people, and we torture and imprison journalists who uncover the secrets of our government war crimes, or worse, as our government has done, conspire to kill Julian Assange. And still, the British government is thinking about extraditing him to the people who plotted to kill him. When our corporate media censors and punishes people who do not agree with them, and the political agenda of the corporate elite is pumping up a war, another war, for greed, and continues through 3 presidencies, who knew that Leonard Peltier, Lakota elder, for 44 years has been imprisoned without evidence, with fabricated evidence, which every person has recanted and said they were tortured by the people who interrogated them. Every president, Clinton, Obama, the Bushes, and Trump, and Biden have kept this man in prison for 44 years. And he is now sick, and they're keeping him in isolation because he has COVID. We keep people in jail without just cause, and we refuse to release them even when DNA evidence exonerates them. Our prisons are horrific, disgraceful money-making institutions that make money for the few at the oppression of the many. The paid for by corporations, politicians, and the media owned by them keeps us distracted, deluded. Like Thoreau, I say to myself, how can I pay my taxes? It's like blood money. How can I pay my taxes? How can I support a government that has kept a Harvard-trained civil rights lawyer, Stephen Donziger, illegally incarcerated, and now again on house arrest for years for the misdemeanor of not turning over his sources without a fair trial? Stephen, in case you don't know, Stephen Donziger won the biggest environmental lawsuit in history against Exxon, Chevron, Texaco at the time in Ecuador. And they vowed never to pay. They vowed to destroy him. How can I pay my taxes when the judge, Preska, received millions of dollars from that company and ordered him illegally without a fair trial and got away with it to jail in my country? How can any person of conscience not speak out? What's happening in my country that people are so unaware, silent, and inactive? Let's go back to Emerson and some of the things that happened to him when he started to speak out on these issues. Well, first of all, he had to step down from his short-lived stint as a minister. His religious views were considered radical at the time because he believed that all things were connected to God, just like Chief Seattle, and that all things were sacred. Critics believe that Emerson was removing something essential to Christianity, the Father God, the Father of the universe, you know, that man in the sky. And his views, which are the basis of transcendentalism, suggested that really there is no deity like that directing us, but that we are a part of all that is, and we don't need anyone else to tell us the truth. We can find that truth because the spirit of the universe we call God will reveal it to us, in us intuitively and in nature, through contemplation, through prayer, through all the great practices of the world's religions. He studied them all. And when asked his religious beliefs, he said, I guess I'm more of a Quaker than anything else because I like to sit in the silence a lot. I believe in the still small voice, and that voice I call the Christ within us. Not Jesus, like little kids might say, I got Jesus in my heart and Barney on my underpants, but but a connection with divinity, the Christos, the Buddha nature, the Atman, the super consciousness, the collective unconscious that Jung said we share with all humanity. Here's what Emerson said at his famous Divinity School address that got him fired from being a guest speaker ever again at Harvard Divinity School. Are you all familiar with that? Raise your hand if you are. Okay, so you can get Ralph Waldo Emerson's Divinity School address, the whole thing. It was delivered on a Sunday evening, July 15th, 1838. It's definitely a good read. I'll just give you a paragraph. Jesus Christ belonged to the true race of prophets. He saw with an open eye the mystery of the soul. Drawn by its harmony, ravished with its beauty, he lived in it and had his being there. Alone in history, he estimated the greatness of humanity. One person was true to what is in you and me. He saw that God incarnates himself in us. One man was true to what is in you and me. He saw that God incarnates himself in us and evermore goes forth anew to take possession of the world. He said in his jubilee of sublime emotion, I am divine. Through me, God acts. Through me, God speaks. Would you see me? See God? Or see thee? When thou all thinkest, when you think, as I now think, I see God in you. But what a distortion the Jesus doctrine and our memory suffer in his name. And for the ages we have done so. There is no reason that will bear on what is taught as his understanding. The understanding caught from this high chant of a poet's lips. In the next age, they said, this was God, this was Jehovah that came down from heaven, and I will kill you
What are you doing?
if you don't believe this. I will kill you if you say he was a man. The idioms of his language and the figures of rhetoric have usurped his place of truth in the world. And churches are built on his principles, but not his truth. Christianity became a myth, like the poets of Greece and Egypt before. Jesus spoke of miracles, for he felt that human life was a miracle, and all of humanity was such. And he drew that his daily miracle would shine. He knew that his daily miracle would shine as his character ascended. But the word miracle, as pronounced by Christian churches, gives us a false impression. It's a monster. It is not one with the blowing clover and the falling rain. So, transcendentalism contradicted this belief that God is the designer of this universe that's intelligently designed by some image that we have of this great deity. And rather, he asserted the belief that God, Goddess, love, universal intelligence, cosmic consciousness is one with the universe. And as nature continues to evolve, so do we, and so does God. Emerson argued that God is not a fixer. Rather, God and people evolve and are present in everything that exists. Here's a beautiful quote from 1836. A leaf, a drop, a crystal, a moment of time is related to the whole and partakes of the perfection of the whole. Each particle is a microcosm and faithfully renders the likeness of the world. So intimate is this unity that it is easily seen. It lies under the undermost garment of nature, and its source is the universal spirit. It's like a great circle on a sphere, including all possible circles, which, however, may be drawn, are infinite. I know we don't have very much time, and there's more I want to share with you, but let me just say that rereading Emerson and Thoreau and Gandhi through the lens of the Dharma and difficult time today has made me deeply contemplate what I personally am to do as they did in this moment. Because in his words, again, be careful what you worship, because you will become it. That which dominates our imaginations and our thoughts will determine our life and our character. Be careful what you worship. For what you are worshiping, you are becoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Judy. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.